Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session on autonomous weapon system. As you have probably heard in the opening session, the representative of the Holy See has identified this issue of autonomous weapon system as an internet-related public policy issue. 20 years ago, when WISIS started, nobody talked about the military domain, but like all technologies in these 2,000 years of history of mankind, also the internet and other new achievements in technology has been pulled in the military domain. And by the way, the internet started 70 years or 60 years ago as a project under the US Department of Defense. So it was not so far away from the military domain, but in the last couple of years we have seen that here a new issue is emerging. We have several negotiations around this. There's a proposal from the Secretary General of the United Nations to agree on a document in the year 2026. We have a group of governmental experts which is negotiating this. Austria has pushed for a discussion in the General Assembly of the United Nations, and so it's very natural that we should discuss this also in the framework of the Internet Governance Forum. We did it already last year in Riyadh, and this is more or less a continuation, and the aim of this workshop is to do more outreach so that more people are aware what's going on in this field. We will not continue the negotiations here on this table, but we want to collect various perspectives. We have an excellent panel which gives you all the various perspectives. So we will hear in a minute Vint Cerf, the father of the internet and chair of the leadership panel of the IGF, who will give his perspective, and then we will hear from Ambassador Peringer from the government of Austria about, the Austrian initiative. Then we will have two different perspectives from the industry and from the technical community. Benjamin from Helsing will give the industry perspective, and Anna, unfortunately, Anna has broken her leg, and so she is only online with us, will give us the perspective from the IEEE, the technical community, and then we have comments from the Global South with Olga, from China with Professor Paixi, and from the NGO perspective from Amnesty International Norway, it's Gerald, and we have probably also online Chris Painter, the former cyber ambassador in the US State of Department from Washington. So that's the plan, and now I hope Vint is online. Vint, can you hear us? And we are ready to listen to your short opening statement. Thank you.
It's Vint, and unfortunately, I'm not able to open my camera unless someone on the control can do that for me. But here we go. Maybe that just worked. Maybe not. I can't enable the camera for some reason. But if you'll forgive me, I'll speak anyway because we only have a finite amount of time. First of all, it's important for all of us to remember that computers have been involved in weapon systems literally from their earliest creation. The ENIAC computer was at the Army Ballistics Research Laboratory in the United States and was in operation around 1945. And its first use was to calculate ballistics tables for large-scale guns. But I also draw attention to today's environment where hypersonic weapons are becoming available. Satellites are operating at 17,000 miles an hour. There are complex multi-drone attacks that are threatening. There are fire and forget and over-the-horizon weapon systems. There is a dire need for situational awareness in complex environments. We are looking at interest in creating digital emblems, which are the analog of the kinds of red crosses that you see on buildings and vehicles. And finally, we need to remember that autonomous weapons are not just kinetic weapons. that presumably cyber targeting is within scope of our discussion. All of this is to say that the topic is timely and important. It's also to say that the military is faced with a fairly serious problem of responding to high velocity attack and large quantity attack, and they need computing to help them. So I expect that part of our discussion will be whether or not the targeting is automatic or is in fact under some kind of human control. And this is not a trivial question to answer, especially if the attacks are large in scale and scope. But I think that probably is part of our central debate. How do we recognize the utility of computer-based systems in dealing with conflict if we're forced into that? And how do we do it in a way that does not get out of control? And so I think the discussion today will almost certainly center on how do we maintain some human ability to limit the choice of targeting in an automated system so that it only goes after targets that we believe are legitimate. And I don't think that's an easy question to answer, but it's clearly one that this discussion needs to shed light on. So I'll stop there, but I thank you very much for the opportunity to begin, and apologies that I'm invisible. I will try to rectify that during the course of the call. I can stay on for about another half hour.
Thank you, Vint, very much. And I think you already put the finger on the crucial point. It is the human control and what is justified and what is not justified. And as we probably will also discuss, you know, a lot of arguments are now that automated weapon system are also part of deterrence. So that means to save peace, not to promote war. So I think this is an interesting dimension, and let's wait and see what the various panelists can say. Now I move to Ambassador Peringer, because Austria has started 2 years ago in the United Nations a discussion, and the Secretary General Guterres has presented a report last year, which has collected statements from a lot of governments and NGOs. Ambassador, so probably give us a short overview about what Austria has done and is planning, and what do you expect from the next years?
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm pleased to participate in the opening of today's discussion on autonomous weapon systems with some introductory remarks from an Austrian perspective. At the outset, allow me to thank our moderator, Professor Kleinwächter, and our distinguished speakers, both here in the room and joining us, like Windsurf, joining us online, for contributing to this timely and important conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, like all transformative technologies, the application of artificial intelligence in the military domain is advancing rapidly. These developments promise to make tasks faster, easier, and more accessible. Yet, they demand robust guardrails and limitations, in the civilian as well as in the military sector, to ensure that AI is used in a human rights-based, human-centered, ethical and responsible manner. While the civilian domain is increasingly governed by regulatory framework, the military and defense sectors are lagging behind. Austria therefore supports ongoing international efforts to promote responsible military use of AI. These include the ReAIM initiative by the Netherlands and South Korea, and the US political declaration on responsible military use of AI and autonomy. Today, we want to focus on one of the most critical and sensitive issues in this broader field that Austria is particularly engaged on: autonomous weapon systems. Systems that can select and apply force to targets without further human intervention. AWS raise fundamental legal and ethical concerns. These include the necessity for meaningful human control to ensure proportionality and distinction, the need for predictability and accountability, the protection of the right to life and other human rights, and the principle of human dignity. There are also serious risks from a security perspective, the risk of proliferation, including to non-state actors, and the destabilizing autonomy arms race. These topics will be explored further by our expert panel. In light of these concerns, Austria has taken a leading role, as mentioned, in advancing international regulations on AWS. In April 2024, Austria hosted the Vienna Conference, Humanity at the Crossroads, to examine the ethical, legal, and security implications of AWS and to build momentum for international regulation. Austria strongly supports the joint call by the UN Secretary General and the ECRC President to conclude negotiations on a legally binding instrument on the AWS by 2026. Over the past decade, valuable discussions have taken place, notably within the group of governmental experts in Geneva and the Human Rights Council, where a growing majority of states agree on the need for international regulation, including prohibitions and restrictions. However, moving from discussion to negotiations on a regulatory instrument remains difficult. Geopolitical tensions, mistrust, and the reticence to regulate these fast-paced technologies are slowing progress, even as the window for preventive regulation is closing rapidly. In response, Austria and the cross-regional group of states so far introduced 2 resolutions on AWS in the UN General Assembly. The first in 2023 mandated a UN Secretary General report, and its 2024 follow-up resolution, supported by 166 member states, established open informal consultations in New York to address so far underdeveloped legal, technological, security, and also ethical aspects of AWS that we want to put a particular focus on today. These consultations complemented the Geneva-based efforts and demonstrated to be very fruitful and also informative for delegations that have not yet had a chance to participate actively in this debate. Further, informal negotiations included not only states, but also stakeholders from industry, academia, civil society, and the tech sector. From Austria's point of view, the global discourse on AWS must extend beyond diplomats and military experts. The implications of AWS affect humanity at large, from a moral, ethical, and legal point of view, as well as a perspective of sustainable development. These issues concern all regions and all people. We therefore advocate a multi-stakeholder approach. Contributions from science, academia, industry, the tech sector, parliamentarians, and civil society are essential to ensure a holistic and inclusive debate. Today's event builds upon earlier efforts at the Internet Governance Forum in Riyadh, as mentioned, last December, and also the Eurodic in Strasbourg this May. This event will lay a particular focus on ethics, human dignity, and decision-making in life and death decisions, the risk of dehumanization, the value of empathy and compassion, data bias and machine learning, as well as the issue of accountability, to name just a few relevant aspects in this regard. Panelists will examine ethical perspectives from their various angles. For Austria, ladies and gentlemen, humanity is at the crossroads. We must come together to confront the challenges posed by AWS. This moment may well be the Oppenheimer moment of our generation. Experts from across disciplines are warning of the profound risks and irreversible consequences of an unregulated autonomous weapons arms race. There is urgency to finally move from discussions to negotiations on building rules and limits for AWS. The longer regulatory efforts are delayed, the harder it will be to reverse course once these weapons proliferate globally. Democratic countries, in particular, must recognize that this delay is against their own long-term interests and the broader interests of humanity. What is needed now is decisive political leadership to shape international rules on AWS. We believe that today's multi-stakeholder exchange will contribute significantly to this shared goal. And we count on your continued engagement on this issue. I look forward to a rich and constructive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And when you argue that, yeah, it needs a good applause. It was a good overview about where we are and what are the challenges. And when you say that we are at the crossroads, then it has to be taken out of the hand of a small group, and we need a broader understanding, more public awareness, and the IGF is an ideal place because here all stakeholders are represented, and so that we get the full picture and the various perspectives. And so I'm very thankful that we have also in this panel the industry perspective. And Benjamin, I hope you are online. And now I invite you to give your perspective. We started a discussion in Strasbourg a couple of weeks ago, and here is now part two. Benjamin, you are very welcome.
Good afternoon to Oslo from Berlin. Yes, I can hear you well. I hope you can all hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So thank you very much, Professor Kleinwächter, for the invitation. And thanks to the excellent opening remarks from Vint Cerf and from the ambassador that we just heard, which I think clearly the terrain in which we're operating in. Very quickly, I represent Helsing, which is Europe's largest defense AI company. It's the largest new defense firm in Europe. And we were founded specifically to use AI to protect democracies. Reacting to the geopolitical change that we'd seen over the last 10 to 15 years, the founders founded Helsing in 2021 in order specifically to attain tech leadership for democracies so that we can actually get the defense that we need when we see a situation of democracies increasingly under authoritarian threat and increasingly unable to deal with that threat through advanced military means, which have in the past indeed led to effective deterrence. We were losing our technological edge and we faced a security risk. That's why Helsing was founded. I think it's important to emphasize what both the ambassador and Vint Cerf said in different ways, which is that we are in an AI arms race. And it's very bad to be in an AI arms race, but it would be far worse to lose an AI arms race to authoritarian states who do not share our values and wish to actively shape the world in their interest, according to their very different values, rather than ours. But of course, we have to do this in a way that is compatible with our values and that actually strengthens our values rather than undermines them. And that's why at Helsing, we actually see the ethical component of autonomous weapons systems as a competitive advantage, which is why we invest so much in that. We think we are industry leaders in this. Precisely for the reasons that were mentioned by the ambassador, is that autonomous weapon systems, their effects have to be foreseeable. The weapon systems have to be reliable. They have to have traceable effects and ultimately have to be controllable. And this is what we invest in as part of the new generation of explicable AI that can give account for why it has done what it has done and is much more easy to keep within the bounds that we actually set for it. And keeping it in the bounds that are set for autonomy is actually nothing new in military terms. This is in fact not in any way a revolution, but the continued evolution of military command and control, which has always been based on the principle of the delegation of bounded autonomy. Sometimes delegation to a subordinate officer or subordinate soldier, sometimes delegation to a particular weapon system. And we know that actually, as was mentioned by Vint Cerf, computers have been involved in this since their invention. But also we've been dealing with autonomy in weapons systems for an awful long time. As soon as you go beyond visual range combat, be that in artillery or be that in using missiles, to a certain extent, you delegate the authority and the responsibility for the effect to that system. of course, it's launched by human control. It is triggered by human control. But also we can see with the quasi-autonomous systems of the past, be that smart anti-tank mines such as the Panzer Abwehrrichtmine of the 1980s, or even pressure mines using overpressure influence mines, as they were called in the naval domain, there has been a willingness to delegate to systems to actually conduct these effects. Now, of course, that's precisely why the principles that were referred to before of discrimination, proportionality, and respect for the right to life were introduced as ways of understanding the ways that we have to be able to regulate these systems in order that they have that foreseeable effect, which is reliable and also has the effect that we want it to actually have, rather than indiscriminately targeting civilians, for example. Now, I would put it to you that actually with the maturation of the revolution in military affairs, what we are seeing is the ability to conduct sensor and data fusion, and so to use targeting that is triggered not only by one set of sensors, or even by two sets of sensors, as has been in the past with some very basic systems, but by a profusion of different sensors that can actually greatly enhance the precision of the weapons that we are using, and the weapons that we at Helsing in particular try to develop, and which will give our militaries an advantage on the battlefield. Now that to me, raises the prospect of a less problematic rather than more problematic weapons system. Now, we can see also that this is very important in the context of using the advantages in technology to leverage another of democracy's key competitive advantages, which is our willingness to undertake delegated decision-making, which is something that our authoritarian rivals consistently struggle with, be that China or be that Russia. Now, why do I say this? Because the reconnaissance strike complex, which is at the heart of the revolution in military affairs, which loosely means linking up a great degree, a huge variation of sensors with a much more diverse and broad proliferation of shooters, as they're known, or effectors, such as strike drones. This only works to its full effect if you allow delegated decision-making. And for years, the problem with this was that we didn't have the networks that could actually handle the level of data that was being shoveled through them. Now, with edge computing and the development of platform and system-level autonomy, we only have to send back the data through the networks that they need, and so they no longer crash it. Now, that actually increases the possibility of mission command and delegated and distributed control to levels where they're more likely to be relevant to battlefield targeting. Now, in response to the point that was made earlier about the saturation of the battle space, the complexification of the battle space, with a huge proliferation of a variety of different threats, but also a variety of different potential targets, then clearly there's a desire among our militaries to engage in semi-autonomous or even autonomous targeting within certain battle situations. However, I don't think that poses the kind of risks that we often talk about in this regard, because actually that would be engaged when there is a clear attack that is not necessarily involving a mixture of civilian actors plus military actors, but much more likely to be undertaken by a military when there's only military actors or military intelligent machines involved. And we can see that actually panning out in Ukraine, where this is at its highest level of development so far, with the massive distance that is evolving between the front lines. That distance is because of the inability to maneuver. And within that space, you do not get free civilian movement. That is not, it's an area which is basically military only, and which is not available even very much for military movement. So seeing what is going through those battle spaces, which is where these semi-autonomous targeting systems, which are still in their infancy and is not something we actually particularly engage in, would be tested, I don't think it raises quite the same questions. And it's important to always draw this back to actually what are the concrete examples, what are the concrete realities of battle that we'd be dealing with here, rather than focusing on abstractions that might actually take us further away from being able to defend democracies, from being able to use innovation as a form of effective deterrence, as Professor Kleinwächter said, and which would put us in a negative position in relation to this AI arms race. Now, last point to finish up, it was mentioned this might be an Oppenheimer moment. I agree fully, and the attendees at the conference or participants might be interested to read today's website of The Economist, where my boss, Gunbert Scherf, makes a call for a Manhattan Project for AI, because this is the scale of challenge that we actually face. If we lose this race, we are in deep, deep trouble. So we have to win it, but at the same time, we have to do it in the ways that I've outlined that actually strengthen rather than undermine our values. And I'll leave my opening contribution there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope Anna Kaspersen is now online, but she will give us another perspective from the technical perspective and the civil society. Anna, are you there?
I am indeed, Wolfgang. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Fantastic. You do.
My best wishes to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so sorry for not being able to join in person as originally planned. I had an accident in the surgery, so apologize everyone. And Benjamin and I have been in this panel before in Strasbourg, so I see that you'd like to team us up together. I would try to refrain from commenting on what Benjamin just shared with us and leave that for the Q&A afterwards. So first of all, thank you, Austria and Wolfgang in particular, for the opportunity to again contribute to this vital discussion. And I speak today in my capacity as a representative of the IEEE SA. Although my comments, would also carry some personal reflections, I would make that clear. And just for those who are not familiar with us, which I assume some in the room, we are the world's largest independent technical professional organization spanning over 190 countries and bringing together nearly 500,000 engineers and scientists across all domains and disciplines in the technological space. And so my remarks do not represent any political position, but rather reflect a long-standing engagement from our side that dates, back to the early days of internet and autonomous robotics. And I know Windsurf in particular knows this organization really well. He's a recipient of some of our highly regarded awards over the course of many years. But we, our engagement has been very strong for many years on issues of technical governance, in terms of what is happening in the multilateral space, and of course around institutional design of these technical autonomous systems. My role, for those of us, some may have seen, the talk in Strasbourg, so I try to bring something new to this conversation, but I've been involved in conversations around military applications and uses of AI for quite some time, ranging over a couple of decades now, including overseeing some of these processes in Geneva and the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, in the early days and into sort of the more mature stages of where we are now. What I want to offer here is not a summary of technical challenges per se, many of which are now widely acknowledged, but rather a framing, a set of observations based on, I would say, decades of international and cross-sector work and of what is structurally at stake. These are not political reflections, they're institutional and infrastructural, and the claims I caution against are not just hypothetical anymore, they are increasingly being made, and I believe they demand rigorous scrutiny. First, we must stop treating AI as a bounded technological tool. AI is not a weapon system in the traditional sense, as also Windsurf pointed out. It is a social technical methodology, an approach, a system of methods that reorganizes how war is imagined, operationalized, and bureaucratized. It shifts the burden of decision-making away from judgment, accountability, and toward inference, correlation, and automation. And in doing so, it reconfigures the infrastructure of responsibility itself. A core example of this is the growing assertion that AI can not only support, but embody commander's intent. As I've written quite a few places, commander's intent is not a checklist or an input. It is a deeply human and ethical concept, an articulation of purpose, risk tolerance, values, and trust designed to guide action under uncertainty. In human-to-human operations, it is already complex. In human-machine interaction, it becomes nearly impossible. And there are many brilliant scholars, military strategists, etc., that have written extensively about this. I'm happy to share some of their work if that's of interest for those who are listening to this. Systems that simulate coherence without understanding of being asked to infer intent, respond to dynamic environments, and remain predictable without the context, reasoning, or values this requires. And these context, reasoning, and values, are highly fluid as well in battlefield context. Special forces are trained precisely to override instinct, interpret ambiguity, and exercise calibrated judgment. These are tactical and moral faculties that currently machine learning systems find it hard to replicate. Missy Cummings, a leading system safety expert, has cautioned many times that such systems often behave with high confidence in environments they do not comprehend. Their outputs conceal critical reasoning gaps, projecting fluency without understanding. Recent studies from Salesforce, Apple, IBM, and Shumilov have shown that even so-called large reasoning models collapse under pressure. These are studies that have come out just in recent weeks. They generate confident, seemingly aligned outputs that fall apart under compound reasoning or multi-step logic. One scholar, Eric Salvaggio, refers to this as system collapse, a failure mode that emerges precisely when we most need systems to be reliable, interpretable, and contestable. And yet, as Meredith Whittaker has recently cautioned, there is increasing pressure to build agentic AI systems that operate with enough access and autonomy to cross the blood-brain barrier, this is her phrase, between localized systems and operating architectures. In privacy terms, this is already deeply concerning. In military context, it poses risks that not just security, but to institutional legitimacy of using these systems. Once a system crosses that threshold, it begins to alter how decisions are made and who or what is understood to be in command. The Financial Times, so Benjamin also referred to newspaper articles. There was a recent article in the FT that highlights how claims about AI's military promise are being driven as much by venture capital as by verified capability. And there are many differing views on this, and I should recognize it immediately. And it definitely shares, it's important to represent that we all come from different viewpoints. But I think one kind of shared concern, which we also discussed in Strasbourg, is the concern over the narrative power of such claims. And again, as Van Cerf noted in his remarks, military innovation and technology have always been entwined, but AI marks a bit of a step change in my view. It does not simply extend human capacity, it begins to reframe the very nature of operational judgment. I'm convinced that this is different, which brings me to the issue of procurement. Most institutions, including military ones, do not build these systems, they procure them. Increasingly, the systems are modular, pre-trained, and abstracted from the operational realities they're meant to operate within. They come wrapped in marketing language, responsible AI, trustworthy autonomy, ethical automation. These terms suggest coherence and controllability, but often obscure the reality that such systems are trained on proxy data, generalize poorly, and fail silently. The failures that matter will not be system crashes. There will be subtle misalignments between logic and lived operational context. This is why IEEE developed the P3119, which is a cross-sector procurement standard applicable to any high-risk AI system, including those in defense. It is designed to help institutions interrogate vendor claims, clarify assumptions, and surface hidden risks before integration. It includes guidance not only for engineers, but also for policymakers in attendance there, legal experts, institutional leaders, civil society engaged in this space and trying to hold companies and government leaders accountable, because governance begins at the level of specification. Equally critical is the question of infrastructure. Many military systems rely on legacy architectures not designed for high-intensity compute loads. This introduces vulnerabilities, interoperability challenges, and strategic blind spots. Meanwhile, large-scale AI systems remain highly energy-intensive. And this is not just a question of environmental impact. It is a matter of operational security and resilience. Any AI governance framework that overlooks the role of energy and what type of energy, what type of materials is being used, infrastructure, or global supply chain fragility is not merely incomplete, it is strategically naive. And I will come to my final comment now. And in this context, it is unhelpful and irresponsible to frame AI governance as a race. This framing fuels premature adoption, suppresses caution, and elevates vendor narratives over institutional responsibility. Responsible governance is not a brake on innovation, it is its condition. And I believe we must stop projecting responsibility onto the tool. What matters is responsible institutional decision-making before design, during integration, and long after deployment. Without this clarity, accountability becomes hard to trace and governance risks become symbolic rather than substantive. I will close with a reflection from my late mentor, and this is something Benjamin and I have in common. We had the privilege of studying with the same mentor, Christopher Coker, who warned against the illusion that automation can sanitize war. Automation may abstract violence, distance responsibility, or obscure cause and effect, but it cannot, under any circumstances, make war more humane, nor should it. That remains an ethical question and not one that any machine should answer. Thank you so much again, Wolfgang, for this opportunity to share some observations. And I know there are other people on the panel that's going to disagree with me, so we are looking at an interesting debate coming ahead.
Thank you, Anna. And you have seen it's very complex. It's complicated, but it's good to have different perspective on the table. That's why we are here, to get the full picture. And I invite now the commentators here on the table. I would start with Olga from the Global South. So that means you have now the broad spectrum. And what are your comments? How you see it from Argentina? Olga is the Dean of the Defense University in Argentina from the Ministry of Defense in Argentina in Buenos Aires.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for inviting me again to this very interesting conversation. We had that last year in Riyadh, right? And I've been following it. And I would like to bring two perspectives. First, from the academic side, which is what I'm doing now. For the good news, we have started new trainings on cyber defense. For those Spanish-speaking audience and participants, we have a new career on cyber defense, which is free, virtual, and in Spanish. So anyone that is interested is able to apply for a site on it. We had a very, very good response from the Latin American community so far. And we are still developing the curricula for the next years. We started this April with this new career. And of course, we have a focus on focus on autonomous weapons. And I would like to bring this perspective, and then some comments about the Argentina negotiations, which I personally I'm not involved, but I'm informed about. So these focuses are included in the curricula of the career. And first, ethics and autonomous weapons. It has been already mentioned. The ethical implications of autonomous weapon systems, particularly focus on the delegation of life and death decisions to a machine. Analyze the consequences of reduced human oversight in military context. This has to be evaluated from an academic perspective. Human control and responsibility. Evaluate and include the necessity of meaningful human control over autonomous weapon systems. It should be considered that the technical programming can be not enough to address ethical concerns. It has been mentioned, like it depends on energy, on legacy machines and equipment. The important issue is that human judgment is irreplaceable. That has to always have to be in any training in decision involving lethal force. The bias and discrimination in algorithm decision making. This inclusion of artificial intelligence, as one of the speakers mentioned, it is a reality. It's challenging, but we have to face it. And the best we can do is understand it. The risk of algorithm bias in autonomous systems, such as biases, can disproportionately harm marginalized groups and complicate the distinction between civilians and combatants. Then there is the issue about fairness, accountability, justice in artificial intelligence. This is of very high importance. It was already mentioned by other panelists. Human rights and humanitarian law. There is an intersection of autonomous weapon systems with human rights and international humanitarian law. These weapons may exacerbate existing vulnerabilities, especially in regions with high inequality. I mean, Latin America is a region, it's a fantastic, beautiful region with a lot of diversity in nature and people, but there is also high inequalities, fragile institutions sometimes, and systemic violence in some places. So that has to be considered. And policy and legal frameworks and academic focus must include the need for robust legal and policy responses, the need for legally binding international instruments to prohibit autonomous weapon systems operating without meaningful human control. We are including all these issues in all the programs. So summarizing, moral implications of autonomous weapons, necessity of human oversight in lethal decisions, risk of bias and discrimination in artificial intelligence-driven systems, impact on rights and international legal obligations, and need for binding international instruments and regulations. And about Argentina, as I said, I'm not involved in those negotiations, but Argentina has been actively engaged in international discussions and negotiations regarding autonomous weapons system, is a vocal proponent of robust international regulation and oversight of autonomous weapons systems, advocating for legally binding rules that ensure human control, compliance with international law, and the protection of fundamental rights and security, and offer, in collaboration with other Latin American and international partners, has submitted draft protocols calling for prohibitions and regulations on autonomous weapons systems. And I will stop here, and maybe we have an interaction of ideas after that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope you can also prepare some questions. I hope some time is left, but we have still two commentators on the table. Professor Paixi is from the Beijing Communications University, and he can give us the Chinese perspective.
Well, firstly, I would like to comment on Mr. Ambassador, what the Ambassador said about the resolutions. I think you are referring to Resolution 778/241 on lethal autonomous weapon systems. I would somehow refer the adoption of such resolution to a moment that happened in the debate about cyber norms. It happened in the debate of cyber norms in 2018. There are two parallel processes about the cyber norms debate. One is the UNGGE among the governmental experts. The other is OEWG, the open-ended working groups, to have a lot of other actors to be involved in the debate of the cyber norms. So I would say that the adoption of such a resolution as a kind of a 2018 movement, now we say more actors can be engaged in the debate of AWS. So it is a step forward in that kind of perspective. And somehow I'm also, I think some countries, a lot of countries, 152 countries voted in favor of the resolution, and 4 voted against. Russia and India voted against, and some abstained from this. So the dispute here, as I observe, is that firstly, some countries would like to say, would like to keep, for example, the CCW platform as the single platform to talk about AWS or LAW laws, to be exact. And they are arguing, for example, for a kind of high-quality result, consensus report. That episode also happened, by the way, in the cyber norms debate. Mm-hmm. In that debate, I think the United States stick to the position that there should be less members for the cyber norms debate. In that case, there can be a high-quality consensus report instead of a lot of other abstractions. So that movement repeated here. And also there is a kind of dispute about, in the Chinese perspective, acceptable laws and not unacceptable laws. And that, I would say that there is a kind of resonance among countries. For example, Norway, where we are now, and also Finland, Sweden, and also France. They had argued in a GDE session there should be a division, for example, between the AWS that, for example, that cannot, if the weapons cannot, for example, apply with the international humanitarian law, they should be prohibited. So if they cannot apply with the international IHL, they should be prohibited. And if they can apply with it, then they are there. So there is a kind of resonance in that aspect to solve the issue. There is also the dispute about the definition, whether the definition of laws or AWS is clear or not. I think the disputes between the state actors concentrate on these different aspects in terms of the adoption of such a resolution. However, in the long run, I would say it is politically correct, by the way, to engage with more actors, particularly the civil society actors. So that's a response to what you have said over there. And then I slightly disagree with what Benjamin from the industry was talking about. Particularly, I don't agree with putting countries which are essentially different from each other into one block. That said, Russia is not China. China is China, not Russia. China is not the United States. The United States is not China. So it is not reasonable to put countries together. And historically speaking, by the way, Russia is similar to Europe from the Chinese history books. So I slightly disagree with this kind of perspective of putting countries together. And coming back, by the way, to this talk about laws, the Chinese perspective, when the Geneva NGOs visiting China, we had quite some conversations. So the Chinese official perspective, as I understand here, is that if, for example, the UK, the United States, and Russia accepts a kind of a prohibition of for example, the laws or the weapons, total ban of everything, if the powerful countries accept the civil society groups' ideas, like a killer robots kind of movement, and then China is very much ready to be on board, to accept such binding terms to prohibit certain weapons. So that is a kind of response to Benjamin in the categorization and abstraction of good guys and bad guys. And that I think I can treat as a kind of response to the speakers.
Thank you very much, Pike C. And I welcome also Chris Painter, who is now on board. Hope you have finished your other meeting. But before, Chris, I invite you, let's hear what Gerald from Amnesty International Norway has to say, because he is involved also in the civil society movement Stop Killer Robots. So, Gerald, what do you think about all the debates and the perspectives we had so far here on the table?
Yes, thank you very much. For Amnesty International, as a human rights organization, the digital development in the world is a central issue. We work on many different areas. And I have also to state right from the beginning that Amnesty International has been using artificial intelligence in our own work for a long time. We use other digital tools, and so we are far from trying to invent a world where digital development doesn't exist. That's very important. But we also see the enormous impact on people's human rights that digital developments have in many areas. And we try to deal with them. And we are very concerned about areas where people give away control. So that's also why Amnesty is so much involved in this issue of autonomous weapon systems. And I also, right at the beginning, want to thank you, and that is actually my colleagues from the International Secretariat, our actual experts, who have asked me not to forget to say thank you to Austria for both arranging this meeting, but not least for taking the initiative to take this discussion out of the exclusive club of the CCW, because this is an issue that affects everybody. And we know I've worked more than a decade ago, I worked on the Arms Trade Treaty, and we saw the dialogue changed for the people in the global south, who are the ones who are most affected of everything that happens in armament, came to the table and had their say. Then things started to change. And it's very important that those people who will definitely be mostly killed, discriminated, oppressed by the use of killer robots, that they have a say in this conversation. This is not. I agreed with some things Benjamin said. I did not agree with other things he said. But this is not of. It is very important. He has right to not to abstract. Look at this as an abstract issue. I know he didn't mean it that way. I am interpreting it, but for me, abstraction means to kind of look at it superficially and forget the people who are actually affected. And our job as civil society is to talk about the people who will actually be affected by what is happening. And I also, well, some of the things I meant to say, Olga has already said brilliantly, so I do not have to repeat them. But from the human rights perspective, it is very clear human rights are based on human dignity, and the very idea that machines make autonomous life and death decisions about humans is a contradiction to human dignity. So this is something inherently dehumanizing, and we cannot accept that. And the whole concept of human rights collapses once we say we outsource this to automatic systems, not only because it is undignified to let a computer decide who is allowed to live and who is allowed to die. It also undermines the whole system of protection of human rights and international humanitarian law, because legal agency disappears. Who do you hold responsible for a killer robot killing somebody in contradiction of international law? And one of the things I disagree with, of the things Benjamin said, was when he says that we already have for a long time had systems that delegate authority and responsibility to weapon systems. I do not agree, because the responsibility always, as of today, lies with the humans using the systems. And there is always have to be in place a clear international legal system that secures accountability for those who contribute to violating international law. Once that disappears, once we say, let's put that to the machines. Machines are smarter than human beings. They will commit less mistakes than human beings. And not least, warfare by machines makes violations more invisible. It's even more difficult for the victims to actually bring those who violated their rights to justice. And I have the suspicion that this is also one of the very attractive things about autonomous weapon systems, because warfare becomes invisible. The human rights violations, the atrocities, the war crimes, they are not visible any longer. Our guys do not die any longer in the battlefields. Everything happens by machines, and so everything is allowed. And that is where we are going when we are not using this moment now to regulate this very clearly and to state very clearly what is allowed and what is not allowed, and not least also give the industry very clear guidelines on what we want them to develop and which developments they should stay off. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. I'm afraid we cannot settle all these problems here, and I'm also afraid that we will have no time left for interactive discussion. So we have just 5 minutes to go. And so Chris has listened to the last 2 or 3 statements. So he was involved in the debate in Riyadh and also in Strasbourg. So you know more or less, you know, the constellation. So you have now the final words, and you can reflect about what you see, and then we have to conclude, unfortunately. But I'm sure that this discussion will continue in the next IGF or in the Business Plus 20 review. So many things are on the table and has to be discussed. Chris, thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to join you guys. I wish I was there. It's about 1 billion degrees in DC right now, so it'd be much nicer to be in Norway, not just for the company, but for the temperature. Look, my expertise is not in autonomous weapons, but instead in cyber, and I wanted to bring as I have in previous discussions on this, a little reflection on what's happened with respect to cyber and the UN. There's been some discussion of this. I think one of the issues is stakeholder involvement. I completely agree with both the seriousness of this issue, but also the importance of having other stakeholders involved. I would say that because of geopolitical and other issues, getting stakeholders, key stakeholders involved from industry and civil society, including the human rights community involved, has become much tougher. In the what's called the Open-Ended Working Group in the UN, which is coming to its conclusion in a couple of weeks, this has been a major area of debate. A lot of stakeholders are summarily blocked by just one country, usually Russia, which is problematic because their expertise in this area as well is critically important. So it's the UN is, I think, a difficult place to have that stakeholder discussion. Hopefully it will get better. But right now, I think that's one issue. The other is, as important as this issue is, actually working towards some kind of binding treaty, I think, again, because of geopolitical issues, but also we haven't been able to do that in cyber. There's been a divide on that for many, many years now. And we have, as one speaker had mentioned, that, agreed on norms. And that was a particular time when countries came together and saw the common interest in agreeing on that, including China, Russia, and the US. And then there was agreement more generally. And that's important. That consensus is important, but I think very little is going to happen by consensus in bodies like the UN going forward, at least for the time being. And so that's some real politic look at this. And we're seeing this in cyberspace too, where even low-hanging fruit are very difficult now to achieve. And even on the agreement with respect to norms, there's now dispute about what those norms mean, about what international law means. And the biggest part, and this applies to this debate too, is how do you have accountability once there's agreement among countries to any set of things, whether it's a binding treaty or just norms. It doesn't matter if countries don't actually abide by them, if there's no way to have some sort of responsibility, some sort of accountability. And I think that's true here. So, ultimately, I think this is an important area for the UN to look at. It's an important area to look at outside the UN as well. I think you have to add multiple tracks for this, especially to get civil society involved. But I also would note and caution that something we've been talking about for a very long time in terms of cyber is somewhat stalled, I think. There's been some progress, somewhat stalled. And I think that just is a reality. We're not going to make that kind of progress toward a binding convention, but there's things we can do in a resolution, other things to kind of start the conversation. It's going to take a while to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, despite what any of us might want. So with on that maybe negative note, but on the positive note, it's important we're talking about this and continuing to talk about this and giving attention to this issue. I would agree that autonomous weapon issues have been around for a very long time, but it has greater urgency now. So with that, I'll close my remarks, Wolfgang, and let you sum up. And again, good to hear the discussion, and it's a very important discussion.
Thank you very much, and I have to apologize also for the audience and for the other panelists that no time is left to react, but this is an invitation to continue the discussion online and offline. I think we will have opportunities in the future. My understanding is that the IGF will be, the mandate of the IGF will be extended. So looking forward another session in this format on the 21st IGF in the year 2026, even if we have no clue where this will take place. So thank you very much, and I hope you could get, some food for thought from this arrangement here with the various perspectives from the Global South and different stakeholders, the Global North and industry and civil society. Thank you very much. We have 3 seconds to go, and now it's over. Thank you.